My name is Hardesty, and I'm a curator in the Aeronautics Division of the National Air and Space Museum. And today I wanted to make some comments on the new Black Wings exhibit, which is now part of the Pioneers Gallery. And along the way, I'd like to talk about this historical theme and how the museum has dealt with it really over 3 decades. I want to acquaint everyone, we do have a new museum publication related to this theme that came out in 2007. And to show how enduring and ever-present this historical theme is, I just received this upstairs before I came down. It's a calendar related to the Red Tail project, which is a flying P-51 with Tuskegee Army Air Force markings from World War II. And you're probably all aware, too, that George Lucas is coming out with a movie this year, in fact, titled The Red Tails. So there's a lot of interest in exhibits, publications, films, documentaries on this theme. When we began work on Black Wings way back in 1981-82, and then put that first exhibition in this very spot, we had very little to go with. In fact, at that time, there was only one book that was out related to the Tuskegee Airmen, and we had a handful of photographs in our archives related to the Tuskegee Airmen. And the pioneers, the African Americans who were working in aviation in the 1920s and 30s, this was largely unknown. So we had to do a lot of original research. And one of the delights with the opening of that first exhibit in September of 1982 was that we brought here for the first time for the reception many of the surviving pioneers from the 20s and 30s, like Janet Bragg and Cornelius Coffey, and General Davis, who commanded the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II. He was here with Spanky Roberts, who at one time commanded the 99th. And we had some black astronauts as well. So we had a coterie of people, historical and current figures in aerospace who were here. Really a remarkable event. And we could never duplicate that again. And it showed, even at that early point, that there was a lot of burgeoning interest in this historical theme.
I'm Ben Davis, wartime commander of the 99th Fighter Squadron, along with Lieutenants Roberts, DeBow, Ross, and Custis. We became the vanguard of black military aviation by earning our wings at Tuskegee on March 7th, 1942.
Now, General Davis, who is here and narrates our film, he brought up one of the ironic things about this exhibit. African Americans were the only group that were explicitly barred from many sectors of aviation in the interwar years. There was a 1925 study by the Army Air Corps which said that blacks lacked the aptitude to fly, and this was the pseudo-scientific basis for excluding them from entrance in the Army Air Corps. And blacks were routinely barred from aeronautical schools, like C. Alfred Anderson, who you can see here. In order for him to get his pilot's license, he went out, saved his money, went out and bought a plane, and then hired a World War I aviator to teach him how to fly. Couldn't get in an aeronautical school. And Cornelius Coffey, who joined us in that 1982 reception, he said when you flew in those days, in the Depression years, you never knew what kind of reception you would get when you landed at a field, whether they would even refuel your aircraft. It's just an unbelievable context that would be so strange to us today, but it's very much present in those days. Now, because blacks were excluded, this points to a reason, a rationale, if you will, why we did an exhibit on African Americans in aerospace. This is the only group that were excluded. And at the time, there were some criticisms. They said, well, why don't you have an exhibit on Irish and Italians and Chinese and what have you? But it was the blacks who were excluded. And that is intertwined with the American experience, how we dealt with that reality, the Jim Crow era, and how we've been able to move away from it. One of the ironic things now is when a black astronaut walks in space or commands a shuttle mission, it's kind of ho-hum. no one takes any particular note of it. But much of our early work in Black Wings was very much in the realm of recording first, like Banning and Allen, the first blacks to make a transcontinental flight, the first black airman, a man or a woman who did this or that, because these were important milestones. And if you look at the early part of the exhibit, you'll see that many of these early pioneers were trying to elbow their way into an aeronautical world to demonstrate that blacks indeed could fly. And one of the central figures in all of this, and one of my favorites in this story, is this remarkable man, William J. Powell, who died in 1943. He was a veteran of World War I. And he's the grand visionary. He believed that flying, unlike the trains, had not been segregated. Jim Crow hadn't got its clutches on flight. And he believed that blacks in the 1920s and 30s had a unique opportunity to get on the ground floor, as he described it, to learn how to be pilots and mechanics. And he believed, in a very optimistic way, that this would have efficacy for American culture and society, that once blacks got their place, it would begin to erode racism. And this was his burning goal and desire. And this man was remarkable. With very little funds, he organized a flying club, published a book, only a handful survive over here, called Black Wings, from which we derived the title. And it was a call, a thinly disguised autobiography, but a call for blacks to get into aviation. He organized, he wrote a play that was performed in churches and halls, Let Ethiopia Spread Her Wings, which is another call to get blacks into aviation. And he even produced a film using color film, which just came out in 1935. Very progressive guy, and he tried to showcase black achievements. Very much interested in young people, because that's where he saw the future. Had to get young people interested in flying and willing to break into it. It's a major figure, and I urge you to take a look at his career. And he is surrounded by a number of people, including the flight suit of Chauncey Spencer, who was here in the 1982 opening as well. He's deceased, but he made a remarkable flight in 1939 from Chicago to Washington, D.C. And he and Dale White flew down there and began to demonstrate that blacks should get into aviation. And they met then Senator Harry S. Truman and lobbied to get blacks into the Army Air Corps. Now this takes us up to the eve of World War II. And in 1940, there was a growing clamor and agitation that blacks should be admitted into military aviation. This was a real important target in civil rights, because if you could get into that elite company of military aviation, this would give blacks a platform to perform. Very, very important. And one of the, with any kind of social change, sometimes you need patrons. And one important person was Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady, who visited the newly opened Tuskegee Army Air Field and gave all kinds of support for this growing clamor. So in 1941, this base opens up, and they begin to train blacks to become licensed military pilots. Now, it was a compromise, and it was riddled with all kinds of complexities. Yes, they would get training, but it would be on a segregated basis. So what you had, ironically, the United States created a separate black Air Force in World War II. And one of the problems as the war progressed was the incredible effort and sweaty labors that went into sustaining this separate organization. For example, I'll give you an example. Bill Thompson, sadly, who's now deceased, he grew up in Chicago. He, again, was here for our opening in '82. And he told us how he wanted to train as an armorer to serve with this new all-black squadron. He had to be sent to Chanute, Illinois, to an Army airfield to be trained. And when these black cadets would get to these places, they would be segregated, and they'd have a little small class for them. And so for the Army to create the necessary infrastructure to have an operational unit, you needed armorers, you needed you needed all kinds of technicians, ground crews, not just pilots. So you had to create this structure. Well, by the time you get to 1945, there's a certain degree of exhaustion with this thing. And the War Department is kind of shaky about sustaining, and there's a lot of clamor to change it. But the thing that really propelled the change was the story of the Tuskegee Airmen, and this is dramatized here. They were organized first in the 99th Pursuit, later Fighter Squadron. They were deployed in 1943 to North Africa, and then later 3 other squadrons would join to compose a fighter group, the 302nd Fighter Group. And they played an exemplary role in 1944-45, providing escort for the 15th Air Force. And this is, if you will, the story of the Red Tails. So that story is dramatized. Now I want to conclude here fast, but the old exhibit that we had here, we covered it from day one to the very present. But we wanted the new Black Wings exhibit to be integrated thematically into this gallery, which really deals with the interwar years. And what we tell here really is something very much in harmonics with the 1920s and 30s. So we chronicle that in some detail. Now we have an epilogue here, in the book, which takes the story up to the present. So the story is in some ways not comprehensive with this exhibit now, but it goes up to the present period. And I want to alert you to something else that's in the making. This summer, the Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service will launch a Black Wings traveling exhibit. And this will replicate, hopefully, what we did in the late 1980s. And Don Pisano and I worked with sites at that time for a traveling version, went out in 3 copies across the country. And it was a rather successful way to project this story to a broader audience. The people who are in charge of the sites exhibit, and I'm going to end on this, have said something that I think is rather significant. They have said they wanted the traveling exhibition service to be the story of blacks in aerospace, but they wanted the exhibit to be the saga of the American experience, to put this whole story in the context of how, as a country, in terms of this technology, have moved across decades and have changed. And this brings to mind what the late General Davis said. When this exhibit first went up in 1982, General Davis expressed to us his anxiety about it. He said he felt the worst thing that could happen with a Black Wings exhibit is that it would become a ghetto. You know, it would be just for African Americans, it would be just focused just on one group. And when General Davis wrote his autobiography, it's interesting, the title of it was Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., American. And the whole thrust of his life, as he explained it, when he went to West Point and he served in the Army Air Forces, was to affirm the fact that indeed he was an American, and the story of Black Wings fits into the American experience. And so he wanted the exhibit to kind of negotiate these terrains, to be ghettoized in a sense. You know, you tell the story of this one particular group, but you relate it into something for which we all have ownership of. It's part of the American experience. So that's what I hope we're doing over time. And this new exhibit, happily, has educational components in it. It has an interactive, so we speak not only to a broader ethnic composition who would visit, but also age groups. So it's so much more advanced over what we had in 1982.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Ask an Expert. A companion question and answer session for this lecture may also be available. For a schedule of upcoming Ask an Expert lectures at the museum, please visit www.nasm.si.edu.